There's a time we'll call our own, living free in harmony and majesty. Take me home, 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 take me home.
Well, this whole adventure began when my staff and I undertook the job of mounting some bighorn sheep and various other animals for some friends of mine in Wyoming. I own and operate a taxidermy studio in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. This life-size bighorn ram was the biggest bighorn sheep shot on the Absaroka mountain range in the northwest corner of Wyoming in the year of 1986 by my friend Tom Alaman, and its horns measured a full 40 inches. It was quite a task mounting these sheep. And even a bigger task was to see how we could take all these animals in a covered trailer to Wyoming, especially this big elk. I had my doubts. However, we did make it, and once we arrived in Casper, my wife and I were to join an expert guide and longtime friend, Randy Brown. Well, Randy took us out on top of Casper Mountain. Actually, the range was called the Muddy Mountain Range, to hunt for the pronghorn antelope. This was my wife's very first trip hunting for antelope, and she was very excited. But it wasn't just the hunt, it was all the beautiful scenery and the great friendship that we'd enjoyed with our friend Randy. The weather was just beautiful for this time of the year in October. I'd been on previous trips and the weather wasn't quite this nice. Well, wouldn't you know it, right off the bat I went and shot a coyote. It was the very first coyote I'd ever shot. The only reason I shot this young coyote was because of the distance. So I thought I'd give it a try, and as luck will have it, I went and got him. Randy had to congratulate me on the long shot that he paced out at over 325 yards. I was kind of surprised myself. And Ruth said this one would make a nice mount for the family room. Ah, what the heck. We don't have anything mounted at the house, so we thought we'd take it home and mount it up. I was surprised at all the mountain streams just teeming with brook trout. And Randy said hardly anyone had gone up on top of this mountain and fished for them. These weren't very big brook trout, but Randy said there was some big ones in some of the other streams. And these fish were virtually jumping right out of the water. It was quite a spectacle just to see them. I said I'd like to come back sometime and try fishing for them. And there was antelope all over on top of this mountain. And I was surprised because I was used to hunting antelope in the low country. And Randy says originally, in years gone by, most of the antelope did hang out in the higher country. We glassed a lot, seen quite a few mule deer. Even though most of them were does, there were a few nice bucks. And the scenery from up on top of this mountain was just beautiful. Randy said it was one of his favorite places, and not far from home either. There were deer all over. A lot of young fawns. And it was fun just to watch them. I think I enjoy photographing these friends of mine more than anything. Well, the next morning, my dad and two sons had flown in from the Twin Cities of Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, to do a little antelope hunting. And there was deer everywhere, as usual. You'll notice right in about the center here of this picture, that's a big buck mule deer. He just kind of stood there and looked back at us, and then he wandered off into the woods. This was quite a ranch that we were hunting on. And we also teamed up with Randy's father-in-law, Robert, who is quite a colorful character who we enjoyed very much. Well, everyone was anxious, and Mark's turn came first. So Randy and Mark went on a stalk after a nice buck antelope. And they climbed up behind these rocks. I could tell Mark was excited. But these antelope weren't just standing there. They were off and running and wild. Randy glassed and spotted the nice trophy buck for Mark. And he told him to take the shot. And it was a nice shot for Mark. Nice clean kill. I had to go down and congratulate Mark on his fine trophy antelope. He measured about 13 3/4 inches, which is a fine trophy by any of today's standards. And Mark sure was proud. Well, a little while later, we met up with the top hand of the ranch that we were hunting on. Randy told me that this real cowboy, if you will, and I mean real cowboy, was up to herd down the cattle from on top of the mountain. And it was quite a sight to watch his dogs work with him, herding these cattle. He was a very interesting man to talk to. Well, a little later on, we stopped down and met up with Robert and Dad and Kelly. Had a little lunch, and lo and behold, my dad had shot another nice antelope. My dad's also quite a colorful character, and he's just a lot of fun to be with. He just likes to get out and enjoy the great outdoors. Well, the next day it was my turn. The weather had changed and gotten considerably colder. Only I took my antelope down in the lower country. It wasn't the biggest antelope I'd ever taken. But again, it was a nice long shot, so I took it. Here Randy had to measure it and lie a little bit. And by the way, you were probably wondering what happened to Ruth. Well, we'd left Casper Mountain and went out to Midwest Wyoming, which is about 50 miles north of Casper, and she went out and hunted with Tom Alaman, and wouldn't you know it, her first antelope, she shot the biggest trophy on this trip, well over 14-inch antelope. And she sure was happy. Women. Well, next we headed up to Cody, Wyoming, and then on up to Yellowstone Park. Neither Ruth or I had ever been to Yellowstone before, but we weren't surprised on just how beautiful the park was. The weather seemed to hold, and I was in high hopes of getting some good footage. Seems like there was buffalo all around Yellowstone Lake. It's a beautiful lake. The water was almost crystal clear. I was surprised at how big just some of these buffalo herds were. But I think the most spectacular had to be Yellowstone Falls. I can see why a lot of artists go up just to put this falls down on canvas. And here a friendly camp robber came in to beg for something to eat. Also, his buddy tried to see what he could get. Ah, we ain't got nothing for you. And another little friend came up to see us. This has got to be one of the most beautiful falls I've ever seen. And I couldn't get over just how steep some of these canyon walls were. Seems like you could get many, many different views of the falls and the canyon. Well, we headed on up to Mammoth Springs, Wyoming. And some herds of elk had just come down from the high country. And it sure was a treat for me to be able to get very close in some cases with my camera to get this footage. There were two herds of elk here, and this big bull elk had come down to check on his cows, and he was in heat. But these cows weren't in estrus yet, meaning that it would be at least another 2 weeks before he could breed. The poor thing. And there were some smaller bulls in this herd. But this big bull was the dominant one. And as you'll notice, he had a radio collar on, and that's so the DNR can keep track of the migrations. And here the other big dominant bull of the other herd would bugle from across the meadow. And this big bull would just bugle back. This was very exciting to get all this on camera. That's right, display those horns. We know you're the boss. Those two bulls sure kept a close eye on each other, though. Neither one of them missed a trick. They both wanted to show each other just who was boss. He went up where he could get a better look at the other bull. Probably show off his horns a little more. And he no more than went up, and a couple of his cows tried to go over to the other herd. And boy, down he came. He thundered right down off that mountain. Matter of fact, he came straight for me and my camera. He didn't want me getting near his cows either. As you'll notice, he's looking right at my camera. He made me a little nervous for a while. That's right. Go over and check on your cows again. He sure wanted to keep his cows in line. Every time those cows would go over near that other herd, he sure would get nervous. And this was just spectacular. To get this footage, this is what they call the display. The two big bulls walking side by side, hardly looking at each other, to show just who is the boss. I'll never forget it. Well, next we headed off to Gardner, Montana. It's a place I've always wanted to go and try and get some footage of the Bighorn sheep. It's a beautiful town just over the Wyoming border, just outside of Yellowstone. There was antelope all around. And this is something that's just spectacular. To watch this buck antelope trying to herd one of his does. Seems like she wanted to take off and go and join another herd, and he didn't like it too much. Ain't that just like a woman, though? And I can see why they call the antelope one of North America's fastest land animals. Boy, they can sure make tracks. Well, later that evening, we headed just outside of Gardner and tried to see if we could find some bighorn sheep. And we came upon these elk up on this ridge. And if you'll notice this young bull elk just thrashing the trees here. We did see a couple of young rams that night, but it was too dark to get them on camera. And here's a man and his two daughters trying to climb up to the elk to get some pictures. And that elk just stood up there just like it wasn't bothered at all. And if you'll watch off to the left here, there's another young bull coming out of the bushes. And these people are in the bush just below. And here's these two bull elk, not more than 20 feet away from them. It was kind of comical. I got to give that guy credit for climbing up there in the first place. Well, we stayed in Gardner that night, and we climbed up the shelf where we'd seen the two rams the night before. And it was quite a climb just to getting up on that shelf. Ruth says, "Boy, my legs hurt." This was some beautiful country. And we glassed quite a bit, but there were no sheep. Although there was quite a few signs of sheep being up there. Well, we came down and headed down to Corwin, Montana. We heard that sometimes there were a couple of herds of sheep that came down into this country this time of the year, it being towards the end of October. There weren't any sheep. Sure were enough antelope, though. We headed back into Gardner, and outside Gardner, I looked up on this wall, and there they were. Two bighorn rams. It was quite a climb for me to get up there with my camera and my tripod. As a matter of fact, it was all slide rock, and I couldn't even set up my tripod. I couldn't get any higher up. I was afraid I'd spook them. I sat there for a half hour. This sheep just laid down. All I could see was his back, and all of a sudden, about a half hour later, he stood up. It was like he almost said to me, "You climbed up here. If you're crazy enough, I guess you've earned it. Let me show you my horns." It was one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen in my life. I tried to steady my camera on my shoulder, but it was so steep. I had my tripod hooked onto my leg. He just kept looking up that mountain. And smelling the air. Magnificent. I was ready to give up, because all I could see was his back. Well, he went over the top, and I never did see the other one. So I climbed some more, and there they were. This time I could get a little better view of them, and I was able to set up my tripod even though it was windy. This might be the only time in my lifetime when I'll be able to get footage like this. And it made the whole trip worthwhile, because this is what I came for. They didn't seem too bothered by me, but the local people told me any more than one person going up there, and they probably would have spooked. Finally, I was able to get up above them, although there was quite a steep canyon between us. And take a look at this. Ouch! That hurts. It doesn't hurt him. I think I got a headache just watching it. He says, "Look at me. I'm boss and this is my mountain." It's almost like he said to me, "What are you doing up here?" And the other ram just stood up above him and looked at me. I was given a second chance to set up my tripod and to get some of this spectacular footage. I'll tell you, it was so steep the first time for me that I had to slide all the way down with my camera and my tripod in my lap. I even tore my pants wide open. Watch this big ram now as he paws the ground before he lays down. Seems like they always do that, and watch him settle that big set of horns. It's a nice 3/4 curl ram. And this ram kind of looked over the rock as though he was saying goodbye to me. It was just magnificent. Well, I came down off the mountain and I headed back towards Mammoth Springs, Wyoming. Found a couple more herds of elk. There was a few nice big bulls in a couple of these herds. These two little guys thought they'd show each other who's boss. Now will you watch this? I'm the boss. From out of nowhere, this big bull elk, he broke it up. Well, we headed on down to Sunlight Basin, to my friend's mountain home called Few Acres. My friend Buck Alaman from Midwest Wyoming owns this beautiful mountain home and let Ruth and I stay there for a few days. And I'll let you guess just how big this antelope is. Well, the next morning it started to snow quite heavy, and because I didn't have a four-wheel drive truck, I decided to come down out of the mountains and head towards Cody. Once we got to Cody, we decided to pay a visit to the new international headquarters of the Foundation for North American Wild Sheep. We were warmly welcomed by some of the fine people that work there. This new headquarters is just beautiful, and I spent some time there telling them of my experience with the Bighorn sheep. This is a picture of William Feely with his welded sculpture of a ram's head, and once completed it will be on the lawn of the new Sheep Foundation. I also learned of all the great things that the foundation does for wild sheep in North America. Well, late that afternoon, we decided to leave Cody. The weather had cleared off considerably, and the view of the Absaroka mountain range was just spectacular. We headed down through the Wind River Canyon towards Casper. The next morning, we arrived at Randy Brown's hunting camp. This camp was located at the base of Casper Mountain, where we had previously hunted on this trip. We met some fine folks from all parts of the country. This young man was very proud of his first mule deer buck. Well, it was time to head back home again. And I'd like to thank all the people that made this videotape possible, and all the ranchers that let us not only hunt, but photograph this beautiful country. Thank you for joining us.